ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
You're
It's
cute,
so
China.
Look, I'm having tea.
Oh my God, real quick.
Uh-huh.
Nothing to do with this. There is a Betty Boop horror movie that has
Get
come
out.
out. And I was like, oh my God, like if you were a cabaret girl, you would be Betty Boop. And it's called
Love it.
Betty's Revenge, and it's on Prime. So
I am
check it out.
loving
I haven't
all
seen
of
it yet, but I think we're going to watch it maybe this evening.
But it's on Prime.
Yes,
I'll watch
you
it
can
too.
rent it.
Oh, well, I'll see. You know what? We have a VPN, so I'm going to see if it's free anywhere in the world.
Or if I can give you my login. I rent it. You can just watch it.
Oh, okay. And then maybe we can talk about it next time. Just having a friendly conversation. Okay, so hi, and welcome to Annotations After Dark. I'm Claudine Aguilar.
And I'm Michelle, and welcome to episode 2 of Wuthering Heights. In today's session, we are going to discuss chapters 4 through 9, and we're going to hit some very specific, not landmines, that's where my mind went, but very specific elements as we go through to the exposition and some of the rising action of our novel. So we're going to look at Heathcliff's description as it pertains to race and gender. We're going to address religion and hypocrisy as it starts to develop and more seeds are sown of those themes throughout. Trauma bonding as well as abuse are going to become really prevalent and are really going to also set up some of the narrative arc of stories, specifically between Heathcliff and Catherine.
There is a very thin line between trauma bonding and love, y'all. Very thin line.
Yes, they mask each other. It gets messy, as you well know if you've read this far.
Or you've been there.
Or you've been there. Oh God, I hope not all of us. Most of us. We're also going to take a deeper glimpse into Catherine as she is developing as a teen, what gender roles are shaping her, and how not only is education and class and her gender really molding and kind of restricting her, but also on the other side, how it restricts and molds Heathcliff and other characters as well.
And creates a chasm between these two characters.
It does. Their relationship ends up kind of like the moors where they used to love to play. It becomes kind of barren, dreary, and a little less fertile of an imagination.
It's a beautiful connection.
And finally, we will discuss the beginning of Heathcliff's revenge arc, which will carry us through to the resolution and denouement of the novel. It's what he lives on. We'll get into more about that later.
All right, so now we'll break into the plot of the narrative and what happened. Just so you remember, a lot happens in this. This is basically the entire childhood of these kids. So, in chapter 1, we leave Lockwood off with a lot of trauma and now the sniffles because he's sick. You spend a lot of time walking on the moors. If you are from London, you're probably not used to this northern weather. And so you're going to get sick. So he does. And then, because he's such a misanthrope, right? He needs Nellie to keep him company so that he's not bored all the time. But also, let's be fair to Lockwood. It's because he wants to know what happened to these people. He wants to know why are they the way they are, just like the audience wants to know the way they are. So Nellie comes in and starts giving him the nitty-gritty. We find out that Nellie has been with the family basically since the beginning because her mother nursed Hindley. A little bit of background information on that. Back in the day, high-class women did not breastfeed their own children. That was considered déclassé. So they would hire someone in the village to come in and nurse for them. And
wet nurse.
Wet nurse. So anyway, this little girl who's just a wee thing while her mother's doing this comes and she starts playing with the children. So she grows up with these children. It kind of mirrors this idea of Heathcliff, and them growing up together, but now the class structures are rigid and she's working for them. And because of this, she knows the ins and outs of this family because if you've ever watched Downton Abbey, you know that the workers of a house know all. She starts telling him how Heathcliff shows up at the house. Heathcliff is adopted by Mr. Earnshaw, who brings him home one day on one of his trips to Liverpool. A little background information about Liverpool. That's where the slave trade in England used to take place. So that's very important for Heathcliff's race. As they grow up, there becomes a rivalry between Hindley, the eldest son, And Heathcliff, as Mr. Earnshaw, the father, seems to like Heathcliff a little bit better. He kind of wishes this was his son. At the same time, Catherine and Heathcliff are growing up together, and they're becoming the best of friends. They're also kind of trauma bonding because at this time, things are getting a little bit more hairy in the household. Mrs. Earnshaw dies. Mr. Earnshaw sometimes can be a little cruel. Joseph can be a little cruel. Hindley can be a little cruel. And so they're trauma bonding. She, as a female, as a woman, I hate when people refer to women as females. She is a girl, and he, as a Black boy, are now, the outcasts of the primogenitor that is Hindley. So Hindley goes off to school. Mr. Earnshaw dies. Hindley comes back, and the real abuse of Heathcliff starts as the class structures start becoming a little bit more widespread, if you will. But Heathcliff and Catherine decide to make a pact. Nothing's ever going to tear them apart. They're going to be savages together forever until Catherine hurts her leg and is forced to stay at the very mannered estate of the Lintons, who have two little children of their own, Edgar and Isabella, with whom she becomes fast friends around the age of, I think it's 13, maybe 12, 13 years old.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And so now she's forced to stay there for 5 weeks because, get this, in the Victorian era, if you hurt your leg or if you got sick, your parents didn't come pick you up. You just kind of had to stay where you are. I think Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth gets sick and now all of a sudden she's just living at this place. And those 5 weeks are
I need to do that.
I know, right?
I need to do that with somebody. I'm
can I
sorry,
find
I'm
some
sick.
room?
I need to live with you for 6 months.
It's giving Bridesmaids. Help me, I'm poor. So anyway, she gets this all expense paid vacation to the Lintons, and she realizes, ooh, having money's nice. Being kind of the class is nice. So that when she
The grass is greener on the other side.
It really is. And you know why? Because they have servants who can trim it and give it manure and make it nicer. Anyway, she comes back. Heathcliff doesn't even recognize her. And even though she tries to get back together with her friend, he's not having it. And now this is where we really start seeing the rift take place. That, as Michelle said, is going to cement the chasm, like the moors that grow between these two children, and thus begin the vengeance that is Heathcliff's.
Mm-hmm. And the love triangle that ends up happening.
Yeah. Oh my God,
And
the love triangle.
And I think love triangle somewhat overstates things. I think it's triangle, but I don't know if it's exactly about love as much as it is about possession.
Yes. Oh my God, possession and possessions, right? We're going to talk about how Heathcliff really wants to have possession of Catherine. Catherine really wants to have possession of possessions. And therein is that triangle. So
therein lies the rub.
Oh my gosh. I love Shakespeare.
Well, speaking of possessions, let's get to the nitty-gritty basics because we are introduced via Nellie. She is a new narrator. Remember, one of the elements of Gothic tradition is multiple narrators. So we started with the narrating frame from Lockwood. Now we've moved into the frame of Nellie, who is, as you mentioned, a servant who has grown up in this home since she was a little girl. And at this time, servants were meant to or obligated, or as tradition states, you are there for generations. Generations of your family work and serve another family or another space. So with Nellie as the narrator, we get a closer view and we get the family that is the Lintons and the Earnshaws. So maybe you can help us piece together with a family tree. Who are these people with all of their name sharing and name flip-flopping?
This is painful, you guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is going to be really hard to follow along. And that is why in every episode, we will be putting this very helpful family tree in the episode notes. So whenever you get lost, just click on it. The visual helped me a lot. So I will share the visual now and we'll go from there. All right. So let's look through this family tree. if you look to the top left-hand corner, you'll see there's old Mr. Earnshaw and old Mrs. Earnshaw. These are the parents at the beginning of the novel that we meet. Old Mr. Earnshaw is the person who adopted Heathcliff, who's in the middle all the way to the right. I kind of like the way that they represented this because notice that he is not connected to the family. He's just floating on his own space. But old Mr. Earnshaw has adopted Heathcliff, yes? So old Mr. Earnshaw and old Mrs. Earnshaw have two children, Catherine Earnshaw and Hindley Earnshaw. Hindley being the eldest, although even if he wasn't the eldest, it wouldn't matter because remember the law of primogeniture. He could have been 4 years old and he still would have inherited everything over Catherine. So we have these two children. They grow up together with Heathcliff, who's been adopted. But when old Mr. Earnshaw dies and when old Mrs. Earnshaw dies, Hindley owns everything. And so he comes home with Frances, who it is noted that she has no name. And we'll talk what that means. What does it mean not to have a name at this time in society? It is at this time that Catherine becomes involved with the Lintons. We have old Mr. Linton and old Mrs. Linton and their children, Edgar Linton and Isabella Linton. Everybody with me so far? So
just one quick sec, because I think you should go into that point. Henley leaves and goes to school and comes back when his father is ill and dying with Frances.
No, he's already dead. I think
he's already dead. That's right. You're correct.
Pretty sure he's already dead.
He comes back with Frances. And the one thing that Frances and Heathcliff have in common is they do not have a last name. So what are the of that?
Yeah, Frances and Heathcliff don't have last names. Now, names back then, that doesn't mean that Frances, by the way, didn't literally have a last name. It's just that they have no, like Heathcliff. Heathcliff literally has no last name. They never bother giving him one. It just means that their name is of no consequence. In a time where, you know, if you say Windsor, everybody knows what family we're talking about. If you say the Spencers, everybody knows what family we're talking about. Diana Spencer, the mother of William. Diana Spencer's name is very, very, very old. It dates back to the Tudor dynasty. So, or what Regency, whatever. The point is, the fact that they have no name means that they are of no consequence to society. It could have meant that if Hindley brought Frances back to meet old Mr. Earnshaw, even though, like we said in the first episode, they aren't of necessarily the nobility. They are of the landed gentry, and their name is very old, which means it carries a lot of respect. And old Mr. Earnshaw might have said, no, you can't marry her. We need you to marry someone with a lot more money, a lot more prospect to elevate our name upward, because the name of the game was always to climb up. Movement. The fact that old Mr. Earnshaw is dying and then he marries her at like in elopement is a big deal that never gets really discussed because now he is the lord of the manor and he can do whatever he wants. So yes, Heathcliff having no name also is very big within the society. The fact that the Lintons are also of an old name carries a lot of weight here, more so than money.
Now, just to go back, Catherine Earnshaw, she, the sister of Henley, the childhood friend of her adopted brother, quote unquote, Heathcliff, when she's injured, she is spending time with who we see across from her, which are Edgar and Isabella Linton. And they are the family that live in Thrush Grange.
Yes.
The Earnshaws are in Wuthering Heights, and the Lintons are in Thrush Grange. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Okay. So the Earnshaws own Wuthering Heights, the Lintons own Thrush Grange, but we already know, this isn't a spoiler, because we already know at the beginning in chapter 3, it is very well established that Heathcliff now owns it all. How did he pull that off, right? He owns the Grange, he owns Wuthering Heights, and also we see that he marries Isabella Linton, Edgar's sister. How does he pull that off? By the way, I really hate this picture of Heathcliff because Heathcliff would not have been a white man, just so you know.
Yes.
I tried really hard. The erasure of people of color is strong, okay? But anyway, I mean, I did find some, but they weren't very good. So how did he pull this relationship off between Isabella Linton? We don't know. That is part of the mystery that we're going to find out because they get together and then they have a child, and this is where it gets really confusing, who they name Linton Heathcliff, because that's not confusing at all. So Linton, the last name, becomes Linton, the first name, and Heathcliff, the first name, becomes Heathcliff, the last name. Get ready, it gets worse.
We're going to the south.
Yeah. Oh, God. Now, Catherine Earnshaw and Edgar Linton get married. That's something we find out in these chapters. Catherine decides she's going to marry Edgar in chapter 9, as we will see. And they get married and they have a daughter named Kathy Linton. Again, not spoilers because we know this from chapter 3. Nellie tells us all this. So Catherine and Edgar do get married and they have a daughter named Kathy Linton. And so Kathy Linton and Linton Heathcliff are cousins. Okay. Do we have that all squared away? So now instead
First
of Catherine,
cousins at that.
yeah, first cousins, Catherine Earnshaw becomes Kathy Linton. So when we're referring to this in our podcast, we'll be referring to one as Catherine and one as Kathy, and we'll try never to confuse you by doing that. We'll always refer to Linton Heathcliff as Linton, so you know we're talking about them. We'll always refer to Edgar Linton as Edgar and Isabella Linton as Isabella, so we don't get confused, because in the book, they change it around. This is my warning to you. You have to pay very close attention. They will be shifting these constantly, so use context clues to figure out who they're talking to.
Yes.
On the other end of,
can I just say,
yes,
another way to think of it is as first generation, who we talk about in the exposition and in the climax, and then the second generation in our falling action and denouement. So if you're trying to organize it in your mind as like, who are we talking about? That is also a helpful way of first generation, second generation, because we do have that doubling that's happening. Again, another Gothic element. Why? Claudine mentioned earlier, passed on trauma, things that we carry, sins of our fathers, right? All of that.
Exactly. And just a little bit of a side note as well, not only do we have doubling in names, doubling of the generations, but doubling in narrators, like Michelle brought up. So there's like everything is doubled here. And then finally, as we saw in these chapters, Hindley and Frances end up having Hareton Earnshaw, who becomes the eldest of the entire clan and thereby the rightful owner, or should have been the rightful owner of Wuthering Heights. And how did it happen that in chapter 3, Lockwood describes him as having no education, thinking that he is a servant? This is part of the mystery as well, because when we meet Hareton and Kathy, they are he can't tell whether they're servants or not. And the only reason that he says, I don't think Kathy is a servant, is because she carries herself with an air that is class recognizes class. Okay. And so he can recognize right away, I think she's something more. But why is she dressed like this? And why is Heathcliff telling her to make tea that is not her station? And that kind of lands to the mystery. Now, these days, that wouldn't seem so weird to us, but back then, the way that you behaved was a big deal. And that'll bring us into the discussion of the novel that we're going to have today, because here we start getting some of the puzzle pieces necessary to understand a lot of the mystery that got Lockwood so intrigued into this story. And that at the time these are things that would have really intrigued the society as well. Why is there no distinction between class? I mean, the UK is still a country that they can hear an accent and they know where you went to school, what neighborhood you're from, what class you're from. And, I once heard when I was living in London, my friend once said, the reason that the Brits, there are a lot of reasons Brits don't like Americans, but one of the reasons that Brits don't like Americans is that they can't tell what class you're from just based on the way you speak. And that is, really disconcerting to them. That's how deep class goes. And if it's true now, imagine how much truer it was during the Victorian era. So
100%.
that's our family. So that's our family tree, and I will get into our discussion of the novel.
So this family tree is a perfect segue into our discussion of Heathcliff. As you've noted, we already know that he's been adopted, that his racial background is a little ambiguous, other than that he is a person of color. So let's get into our introduction to Heathcliff.
Okay, so, Lockwood is now sick, and Nellie is telling him the story of Heathcliff because, of course, this man has a lot of questions. Who amongst us wouldn't if they had just experienced what they just experienced? I mean, look, I'm really close to my family, and I go to carnasadas all the time, and if something is off with the family, the first thing I do is get on the phone with my primas, and I'm like, yo, what happened? Because something was off. And then the chismes, the gossip starts, right?
Right. The
Lockwood is a little
chisme.
the cheese. Lockwood is a little gossip, and this is probably the one thing I like about him. I'm like, yes, babe, give me all the tea. And Nellie is more than happy to oblige because, I mean, let's face it, she's probably traumatized by this whole thing too, having grown up with this entire
But
family.
also, it's nice to have the injection of someone new
Mhm.
because one of the things about this story is isolation plays a huge part
Oh,
in
yeah.
the interactions that they have with one another, the lack of interactions they have with other people outside of this little realm of the moors and Thrushgrange and Wuthering Heights. So the injection of an outsider is wholly new. So Nellie is like, hey, I've got tales to tell. Let me begin. And what does she tell us about Heathcliff?
So he says, so do we know anything about his background family? Of course, this would be the first question that Lockwood would ask, because the fact that Heathcliff is living and has two, not just one great property, but two great properties, but also is a person of color at this time, like we said in episode 1, wouldn't have been necessarily unheard of, but what would have been unheard of is the fact that he has no name. He's never heard of him before.
He's
And
just
now
Heathcliff.
it's just Heathcliff. And so this guy's like, that is the number one thing on his brain. So he asks Nellie, so who is this guy? What is his family? And Nellie responds, he is a cuckoo, sir. Now, what's interesting about that, people will sometimes read that and they don't think anything of it. But a
Or
cuckoo,
they think cuckoo as in crazy, like cuckoo,
oh yeah, like
cuckoo.
yeah, that's true. They think he's crazy,
And
but
that's
that's not what they mean.
superficial. That's superficial
Yes.
reading of this.
What cuckoo really refers to is the cuckoo bird, a real bird. And what's interesting about the cuckoo bird is that they don't build a nest and they never pair. If you look out into the wilderness, birds pair during mating season, some of them for life, and they raise their children together. This is not what the cuckoo bird does. The cuckoo bird takes its egg once it's hatched and puts it into another bird's nest. So that the other bird does all the work of raising that little chick, taking care of that little chick. Meanwhile, the cuckoo bird is free to do whatever it wants. This is where we get the term cuckold from. So if anybody's ever called you a cuck or a cuckold, like in Shakespearean language, it comes from the cuckoo bird. And so the fact that Heathcliff is a cuckoo bird, one, shows that he has no family. He's been abandoned by his family. He doesn't have a name, very important, right? Like we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But second of all, it also is the representation of him being a cuckold within this family. Something that, as we discuss this chapter, we'll see is why Hindley hates him so much. He has cuckolded his father. He has cuckolded his father's affections. And so what will often happen with a cuckoo bird, which is really foreshadowing for this novel, is not only does it take on the parents' affections, but it'll take on the parents' affections so much so that they will push their own children out of the nest in favor of the
Yes.
cuckoo bird.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's the sinister nature of that too, because, I don't know why in nature, like, why can't this bird build its own nest? And I'm not asking you that, but people might have that question.
'Cause I
Build your
have
own
no idea.
nest, raise your own children. But there is something to it where the preference is to have an other raise that child or that bird. And the bird adopts and manipulates in order to get fed and is often the most robust bird of that nesting field. So
Yeah.
it also reminds me of this movie. I'm so sorry, but it's called Cuckoo and it's with Hunter Schafer and it is like right up this alley. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. Really interesting connection there because you do actually see this in that movie.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm going to totally check it out. And, one more connection for those readers who either read Jane Eyre for fun or are being forced to read it at school. The girls, the Bronte sisters, did have this book called Bewick's History of British Birds, which is what little Jane is reading in chapter 1 of Charlotte Bronte's story. And they would have read all about this. In fact, please pay attention to the bird imagery throughout this novel. It's going to be so much. And like Michelle brought up in our first episode, they live on the moors, so they're always connected to nature and they're observing it. And so the bringing of this is beautiful symbolism. Impress your teachers with your knowledge about the cuckoo bird and the foreshadowing that this presents. So besides that, we also have, like we were talking about last time, the racial sense of this young boy.
Absolutely. So Nellie gives us a perspective of when she first encounters Heathcliff after Mr. Earnshaw has brought him back from his travels. And she says, I had a peep at a dirty, ragged, black-haired child, repeated over and over again in some gibberish that nobody could understand.
Yes. And so the fact that he's speaking in gibberish, right? It's not gibberish, it's a different language. So this gives us evidence to the fact that Heathcliff is, he may be Romani. The Romani had a different language. He might also be of the African or Indian continent, because remember, he was picked up in Liverpool. And Liverpool was a huge hub for the slave trade and as well as just sailors from all over the place. There's also another quote where when Mr. Earnshaw first shows up, he says, see here, wife, I was never so beaten with anything in my life, but you must even take this as a gift of God, although it's as dark almost as it came from the devil. So already setting up this like racialized juxtaposition. If it's light, it comes from God. If it's dark, it comes from the devil. So Heathcliff has been adopted into a pretty racist family. I mean, not that we can blame them. I mean, we can blame them, but, what the hell did they know?
We can, and they're also stating the obvious. But the question is, why does Earnshaw take him? Like, we don't understand, at least we're not given from the novel, why he brings him home. Is this someone he saw scavenging and said, hey, let me try my hand at this? Like, I'm a Christian. It is my duty to, help the impoverished or people that we see as like less than. Is that what happened here? Could it be that this is a child from another relationship where this child is left to their own devices? Who knows? We actually don't know. We don't know Earnshaw's motivation, but I do think it odd, and to tie into the cuckoo of it all, his affection towards Heathcliff, his investment in him is much more than he has for his own children, Catherine and Henley. And I think that leads us into, but I'm sure, I don't know if Heathcliff did much to garner that affection.
Didn't. I mean, when I was reading this, yes, I was like, and I think, I can't remember, I've watched so many iterations of this on film now. I don't know if I'm superimposing a director's interpretation or if this was actually in the book. So reader, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Don't bring it up in the classroom. Your teacher might think that you just watched the movie. But I do remember that there might have been there is always that scholarly speculation. Like, is this someone that he fathered out of wedlock and therefore brought him in, something that would not have been unheard of back then? Or is it just someone he, like, through Christian sponsorship saw on the side of the road and just picked up and brought to him, religiosity speaking? And, something I always wonder was he even alone? Like, maybe what he was trying to say in gibberish was, my family left me here. They're waiting for me. I want to go back to my family. And this guy, in his kind of Lockwoodness of obliviousness, because he just sees a poor dark-skinned child and just assumes, well, of course they abandoned him. That's what they do. And so he takes him in without realizing that he's actually stealing this child from an actual family. He isn't abandoned at all. At least that's where my mind went when I read this. And I think we see a lot of evidence to this in chapter 5, right? Yes, in chapter 5, where Mr. Earnshaw starts declining in health, and we also see an uptick in his religiosity. And back
Mm-hmm.
during this time, we talked a little bit about this, I think, or maybe we didn't in the first episode. There was the Great Awakening. And what this awakening was all about was it kind of was what would give birth to the evangelical movement of present day, or at least that's the line I connect. It is a religion that really believed in a vengeful God. Joseph very much talks like a reformist. They
Yes,
believe
he
if you,
is buried in there as a mole, right?
yes,
Echoing and espouting these religious beliefs, but is also called a Pharisee, right? He's a hypocrite.
yeah.
And Pharisees in the Bible were those of a high religious order. And, because of that, they were given a lot of respect and they were also given a lot of money, but they abused their position. They used their
Mhm.
position in the religion as a way to garner wealth, where that was opposite to what the teachings were telling them to do.
Yeah, and so here we start seeing that Mr. Earnshaw in chapter 5 is failing in health. And, when people start failing in health, people start reflecting on the fact that they're going to die, what's going to happen to them in the afterlife. And so sometimes I wonder if the reason he favors Heathcliff so much is that he's trying to put in some late work for maybe some
Mm-hmm.
misdeeds in the past, is trying to fix some things. And so by favoring this poor Black child, he's kind of echoing Kipling's poem,
Mm,
The White Man's Burden, of like, oh, it is up to us to reform, to teach, to uplift, and then thereby we save our own souls, which is kind of a racist trope in and of itself. But
absolutely, it is.
yeah, not
Yes.
kind of, just is.
Like the white savior.
Yeah, the white
They go
savior
hand in
complex.
hand.
And so I'm wondering if this is kind of a white savior thing and that Hindley doesn't understand this, because Hindley, I wonder if Mr. Earnshaw is like, I mean, we don't know very much about Mr. Earnshaw except when little Catherine, we see that Catherine is becoming a very wild child, especially with Heathcliff's, I don't know if influence or if she's influencing Heathcliff
I
or if
think
they
it's
like,
a shared
yeah,
mischief. That's what I
there's a
like to
shared,
think. Like there's a
yeah,
shared
they're
mischief
children.
there.
They're children,
Yes.
except girls were expected to know better. I mean, girls are still expected to know better. And Catherine is very willful. And so he looks at her and he says to her, Kathy, why can't you always be such a beautiful child? And one of my favorite quotes from Catherine is when she looks up at her father and she's like, I don't know, Dad, why can't you always be a better man? And so that gives us at least a little bit of a hint that maybe Mr. Earnshaw wasn't always such a great guy. And so he's trying to make up for this lost time, and Hindley's not picking up on this. Maybe it's not so much that Earnshaw is trying to push out his son as much as he's like, well, Hindley is going to get everything. I want to be able to help someone who has nothing. Call it a white savior complex, call it religiosity. But Joseph, pay attention to that character. I love that you called him a Pharisee. He's very much like, I think, trying to get ins with the family. Have you guys ever seen The Mummy with Brendan Fraser?
Yeah.
You know,
He's
you know
just
that,
really trying to throw his weight around.
yeah, he's like Benny, who's like praying in all the
Yes.
religions until
Yes.
like he can get
I
proximity to
love it.
power.
Whatever one works.
Yeah, whichever. I love that scene. And so like,
That's such
and
a
so,
good reference.
and I think that is Joseph. Like, I think Emily Bronte, as we may have discussed in the first episode, I can't remember now, but could have, because we talked so much that doesn't always make it to the episode, because Michelle and I can talk, y'all. Mostly me. Emily Bronte was very critical of religion and orthodoxy and the hypocrisy of organized religion. She was a lot more transcendental, a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she would not have called herself transcendentalist. I'm using that term, but she saw God in nature. She saw, she really loathed this organization, which is ironic given that she came from a pastor and a very religious aunt. And I think through Joseph, she's making a lot of critiques about organized
Critiques and
religion.
commentary on it,
Yeah.
100%. I was going to say, and with that, Heathcliff having Mr. Earnshaw's preference, if you will, that really creates a divot in the relationship between Henley and Heathcliff that already existed just because he is this newcomer, like, who dat? Who are you? Like, why are
Yeah.
you here? Right?
Oh my
But
God, Dad, do you
also,
know what they're saying about you in the village? God, why do you do this to
exactly.
me?
But because Heathcliff is new, Catherine latches onto him. She calls him her pet.
Hmm.
He is her plaything, and that's where that bond occurs, which leaves Henley completely out of this family. And
Yeah.
granted, he's older, so he is going to school, but we're isolated here. The only things at Wuthering Heights are the Earnshaws, two of their servants, or, a couple more hands, and the children, and that's it. So Henley is left out of a relationship that he had with his sister.
There is so much abuse against Heathcliff. It is so sad. And that abuse really starts after Mr. Earnshaw dies, because Hindley kind of has this vengeance. I mean, vengeance is such a big thing in this novel, right? He really has this vengeance against Heathcliff that he's kind of paying him back for his own father, Hindley's own father, preferring this dark-skinned cuckoo bird.
Yeah,
And
it's all the slights. He's
it's
like,
all
I'm
the
going to get you
slight.
for every single
Mhm.
one.
And so
Yes.
he feels like he has to pay him back for this. Even though, let's talk about the fact that, is this really Heathcliff's fault at all? Like, this isn't on Heathcliff. But Cliff isn't always exactly innocent, but let's be honest, what child is? I mean, Heathcliff is a child. So there is this one instance that happens, I believe this is in chapter 5, where Mr. Earnshaw brings them both a horse, and Heathcliff chooses first. But then it turns
Mm.
out that that horse is lame. And so he goes up to Hindley and he goes, "Give me your horse. I don't want mine anymore."
The
And
entitlement, like,
yeah,
where does he get those balls, right? Like,
yeah. And
you're
I'm
the
sure that's how.
adopted child here.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and already, Mr. Earnshaw let him pick first. So
Yes.
that's
And Henley's
already.
like, fool, who are you? I know your horse is lame. I don't want that horse.
Yeah, and so then Heathcliff goes, "Do it, or I will tell Papa that you've been hurting me." And he has proof because Hindley has been hurting him. So it's, everybody kind of sucks here. But I mean, they're children. Tell me, I have stories with me and my cousins with whom I grew up. And,
Mm.
me and my cousin Ernesto are always talking about just the really bad things that we did to one another. Funny story. One of the things that I once did was I put saran wrap on the toilet seat so that when Ernesto went to go pee, his pee went everywhere.
I
And,
think it's amazing.
and then, and then he was about to go to the bathroom and I was like waiting for
Sorry,
it.
Ernesto.
Well, no, it didn't happen to him, because what happened was my dad came home and he really had to go to the bathroom and he pushed Ernesto out of the way. And then all of a sudden, I just hear from the bathroom, my dad goes, "Claudine!" And I booked it. I left the house. But I'm all that to say, like, we do
That's
things
so
to one
funny.
another. I still have a scar from where Ernesto pushed my head into a toy box. Like, we're evil. And so, as children sometimes. And so, I don't also want to say that
I
Heathcliff
would say
is,
cruel. I think
we're cruel.
cruel and
We're
not
cruel.
evil.
Yeah, we're cruel. And so, like, this is natural. So take everything with a grain of salt and remember they're children. But when Hindley comes back, he's a grown man and he starts abusing Heathcliff so much. Like, it is really bad. And
He
so,
is getting the control he never had, right? Like he,
yes.
as the heir, as you've mentioned, he gets everything. So this is his time to wield and to shape the home life the way he wants it and in his vision and not his father's.
Yeah. And so the first thing he does is demote Heathcliff. Like, he basically takes away his status as a son. Up until this point, let's say he's around 12, 13 years old, I think. Up until this point,
I would say,
Heathcliff
yeah.
raised as a son of the family. He's been waited upon.
Mhm.
He hasn't had to do hard labor. He and Catherine go to school together. Well, school, they get homeschooled, but they are getting the same education. And then when Hindley comes, he decides that's not going to fly anymore. You are a servant. So he puts him out in the field with the other boys who are working And this demotion is really hard for someone who's been always elevated. I can't imagine how the other boys treated him as well, that he has to work with the other servants, because, when you talk about governesses, this is a little bit of a side note, but governesses exist in this middle plane between, they're not quite servants, but they're also not of the family. And so they are very educated. And so the servants don't always make friends with them because they are much too
Right.
elevated for the servants, but they also, it's a very lonely place. It's why, it was a very hard job. Heathcliff must have existed in a very similar plane, but even more elevated because he was part of the family. Now imagine being demoted down to the servants who have always been your servants. And even though we don't get that, description in the novel, you can imagine that now he's working amongst the servants and they might make fun of him because, oh, the little boy who's been demoted. On top of that, Hindley uses education, or the lack thereof, as part of this abuse. Not only is Heathcliff now being abused physically, he's being abused verbally, he's being abused in station. But the worst thing you can do to someone, and remember what I said in the first episode, this is where context is important. Patrick Bronte believed that education was freedom, that education opened doors. Remember that Patrick Bronte was able to lift above his
Yes.
station because of education.
And so many people in our world today have that same story, their access to education, whether it's because they went to the library, whether it's because they had an inspirational teacher, they had a curious mind that they were able to feed because they had some sort of access. And I think what you're about to say is that Henley cut that access off, which essentially cuts off part of his relationship with Catherine, which we're going to see. It widens their distance. Like, they can still be bosom buddies if he's working in the field. Catherine doesn't care. But guess what happens after you grow up? If you're not able to keep a pace, you're not going to have that much in common anymore.
Yeah.
And we all have those friends where we're like, we love them, but we just, we're not in the same place. So
yeah, and exactly. And this is gonna be the beginning of the driving rift between Catherine and Heathcliff. And pay attention to it, because this lack of education, which would have meant a lot to the Bronte sisters, because remember back then, girls wouldn't have been educated very much either. And so to someone like Emily Bronte, the withdrawal of education would have been the worst abuse that Hindley could have done. And I think this is where Heathcliff, because as we see Hareton in the first couple chapters, he's also been abused in a very similar manner. I think this is something that impacts Heathcliff the most. What he blames losing Catherine on the most, as in chapter 9, she chooses to go with Edgar. I just have a few quotes here. One from chapter 6, where it says, Heathcliff bore his degradation pretty well at first because Cathy taught him what she learned and worked and played with him on the fields. They both promised fair to grow up rude as savages. But then fast forward, like we talked about, when she goes with the Lintons and she starts kind of acclimating more to that society. Nellie describes Heathcliff as the following once they're a little bit more grown up. Continual hard work begun soon and concluded late had extinguished any curiosity he once possessed and any love for books or learning. His childhood sense of superiority instilled into him by the favors of old Mr. Earnshaw was faded away, and he struggled to keep up an equality with Catherine, which finally culminates in chapter 8, which is just before Catherine decides to leave Heathcliff and that promise of being savages together forever for the comforts of Edgar Linton. Heathcliff says, "You never told me before that I talked too little or that you disliked my company, Cathy." And then Cathy responds, and she mutters this. So this is under her breath. She says, "It's no company at all when people know nothing and say nothing." And so we see how this educational abuse, I would argue, is the real abuse. And it's the one thing that can actually, whether Catherine and Heathcliff are actually in love or they share a trauma bond or they want possession, whatever you want to argue, and we'll get into that later on when we actually have evidence for that in the novel, whatever you want to argue their connection is, the lack of education is the one thing, like water on stone, that can finally break that connection apart, and does break that connection apart. And I would argue that this is where the vengeance really starts, where Heathcliff's anger towards Hindley really begins, is in being deprived of that.
And I 100% agree with you. I just think, and, of course he's a young person. So we're going to give him, we're going to give him that. Like, he can't think of all the things. He doesn't have the life experience to do so, or the guidance or anything. But given what we know he does, it's shocking to me that he wouldn't go to his bedfellow, his bestie, Catherine, who he literally shelters with, and say, hey, let's sneak out to the moors late at night and bring a book and let's read together. You know what I mean? Like, that itself would have been revenge, but that's not where he goes. And my question, and we can ask this throughout, is why? Because he has always found a way to spite Henley by doing something that will get him better. But in this
Mhm.
instance, he doesn't put forward that effort, and he's older now too.
I
Using
would
the
argue,
example of the horse, right?
yeah,
He knows this horse is lame. I'm going to manipulate you. Granted, Henley is in a very different position, right? But why doesn't he say, and later he does, I'm going to spite you, especially when Catherine says, you know what? You're boring. Like, why would I want to talk to you? You have nothing to talk about. All you do is sulk around. It seems that he would garner inspiration, if not from Henley saying you're not going to learn anymore, but from the object of his affection or his lifelong bestie of
mhm.
like, I am going to do more.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I asked myself that same exact question. I'm like, come on, Heathcliff, you're a spiteful man. You know how to like subvert the best of everybody. Subversive, by the way, for our audience, is when someone without power finds a way to like
Flip the switch.
flip the switch, right? So,
Yeah.
like, for example, the example I always like to give is people, because I'm a woman, might think that I'm weak and they will rush to help me on things. And if I'm carrying heavy luggage up from the tube a bunch of steps and then a man steps and he's like, oh, here, little lady, let me help you. Instead of being like the feminist bitch I am and being like, I can handle my own luggage, I'm like, oh, fiddle-dee-dee, please do carry the luggage up for me.
What
That's a
else do you want to carry for me? What
I know.
else can I get you to do?
That's a little bit of the subversion, is that you use the perception of your own
Don't
inferiority.
tell our secrets, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, please. Those kind of men aren't listening to this podcast. Oh God, what if they are? I'll cut that out. Anyway,
Don't cut it out.
no, I won't. So anyway, I think, Heathcliff is a very subversive character. He knows how to subvert the
Yes.
system. So why, I guess your question is, why doesn't he subvert it? And I think this is one of the main arguments that maybe Emily Bronte was making, because they lived in a society where people were deprived of education, were forced to work day and night. And if you ever look at a Victorian society and the way people had to work back then, it was brutal. They worked
Right.
sometimes 20 hours a day from the time that they were 4 years old. I've heard stories about children being propped up onto a cane from sundown to sunset as if they were living scarecrows. That was my cat. As if they were living scarecrows. And
On the moors.
um when you work that brutally, you're exhausted. And
A
you know,
100%.
we see that when he says continual hard work begun soon and concluded late had extinguished any curiosity. It's very hard to be a scholar. It's very hard to maintain curiosity when every ounce of your calories that you consume in a day, and I'm pretty sure Hindley wasn't feeding him very well either. Back then, the poor ate bread.
You're absolutely right.
I
It's
think
just
she's,
amazing knowing what he does. And granted,
and I think
he
he
is the
put a lot of,
master of the house and he has the
yeah.
time, the thought. He's put a lot
Mhm.
of thought and time and effort into that. Like, he's not working. Do you
And let
mean
me
he has a
also
new? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, but also let me say, maybe the reason that Heathcliff didn't think he had to be so subversive is because he trusted Catherine to stick around. He trusted Catherine wouldn't change, that she would respect the promise, that they would be savages together. One day she's working with him. and promising and teaching him and promising. And then all of a sudden she comes home from the Lintons, like we talked about. She twists her ankle or whatever, and she comes back wearing a beaver hat. She comes back wearing gowns. And, when you're wearing these gowns, you're not gallivanting on the moors. There's a quote where, she comes back and she goes to hug him. And then all of a sudden she looks at Heathcliff's hands and they're dirty. And she looks at her dress and he's like, don't worry, I didn't dirty it. And I like to be dirty. And the beginning of the rift between these two characters is really as Catherine and her relationship with the Lintons grows. And she starts becoming more like accepting her gender, accepting the fact that she is of the upper class, she is of the landed gentry, and Heathcliff isn't. And instead
and
of
also that she can become the lady of the land, right? That becomes her ambition, that she wants to be the greatest lady within whatever circumference of space of where they are. And I agree with you. The thing for me is that how can this be that they know each other so well and are unable to see these things about one another? It is clear that she wants that.
I would argue that.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it's clear that she has her ambitions. It is clear that he is being demoted and degraded and that he knows she hasn't helped him and has that angst. Why? They are not reading each other. Why?
I think because Heathcliff, and I think this really goes to kind of highlight privilege and the way that class and race can drive a wedge between us, and we stop understanding one another. People who could understand each other in childhood, now as the system sinks its teeth into them like vampires and they're forced into these separate spheres, all of a sudden can't understand each other. They're not in a position to understand each other. Catherine can't understand why Heathcliff is so tired all the time, why he has no thoughts. He is being worked to death, probably, given the way that people of the lower class were worked back then, probably literal death. You know what I mean? Exhausted. And he can't understand why his friend left him for the very things that they used to make fun of. He doesn't understand why Catherine is like a moth to the flame, drawn to money and power. And it's so sad. I've had this conversation with my friends before. I had this one friend who, he was a Black man, and we would talk about race relations and, how horrible and privilege work against people of color in our society. And as a light-skinned Latina, I have never experienced it to the extent, obviously, that he has. I could understand it to an extent, but I could never fully understand it. And then when we flip the script and talk about women's perspectives and like how I felt in society, he also could not understand why I was so angry. And he would push back against my perspective, my female perspective as a woman in society. And I think we see some of this at play where like Heathcliff isn't understanding that as a woman, she doesn't have the liberty to be a savage that he does. So she can't just run away with him. And then what happens if he gets bored of her or if she gives everything up? She doesn't have the options and opportunities to survive in the society that he does. Her life will be miserable. And she can't understand how him, as a person of color, as an adopted person who's been demoted, how he must feel in this lack of education. And I think this is a good place to start concluding. We see this in chapter 9, where it culminates with her decision to go with Edgar, even though she loves Heathcliff. And she says, "I'm very far from jesting, Miss Catherine," replies Nellie. "You love Mr. Edgar because he is handsome and young and cheerful and rich and loves you. The last, however, goes for nothing. You would love him without that, probably. And with it, you wouldn't unless he possessed the four former attractions." In other words, Catherine is in it for the money. It's not that she's solely in it from the money. As we will see, there is a love. And if Heathcliff had never existed, I think Catherine would have been very happy with Edgar. But
They would
like
have
I
been
said,
okay.
they would have been okay. It wouldn't have
Okay.
been passionate. It wouldn't have been a love story. But in terms of the business arrangement that marriage was at this time, this is the jackpot. He's handsome.
Yes.
He loves you. He's kind. He'll do anything you want. And while the sex is probably bad.
He would even take her into the city. Like he would have, and I agree with what you're saying. I don't think it would have been love, but I think it would have developed. Their care for each other is absolutely there.
Yes.
And
but the thing
if she wanted to see the world, he would have taken her to see the world. The thing of it is for me, with all that you said, and you're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And that's the frustration of this novel. And that's where I get frustrated with other people in my own interpretation of this being a love story, because I don't feel it's about the love between Heathcliff and Catherine. I really feel like it's the recognition of having someone in your corner that has known you from when you didn't know how to mask who you were through the evolutions of who you are today, and having that person be there, because guess who's not there? Her mom, her dad, her brother is
a tyrant
now, kind of. And so Heathcliff is a cornerstone. I think it's about love, but not about romantic love, because later, and we will talk about we'll have a whole episode just about the Heathcliff and Catherine of it all. But she wants her cake and to eat it too.
She just
That's
wants a
what
family.
she wants.
She wants
this family. And he needs the possession, because everything he's had has always been taken away. So this is not about romantic love to me.
No,
it's
I don't
about
think so either.
creating safety and having that safety ripped away, and wanting to lean on somebody that you could trust, but they have also changed, and you have changed, and you don't recognize each other.
Yeah. I want to leave us with this quote, which I think is it's from Nellie, and it's just so perfect. I mean, chapter 9 is just rife with quotes, especially, where Catherine is really trying to understand herself. She's trying the duality you just spoke of. She wants it all. She wants her brother / lover / God knows what Heathcliff is to her, but it's her bosom soul,
her
whatever.
Bosom buddy. Right. Her brother, her friend, her confidant,
maybe her love. We don't know, but she feels a passionate soulmate connection. And people sometimes confuse soulmates for being romantic. It's not always romantic.
You can have your soulmate be whoever, your twin flame or whatever.
Oh God, that documentary changed me forever.
Oh my God, I was about to say maybe not that, because that was weird.
Or maybe
this is weird
because
too.
It is toxic.
But maybe.
It is toxic.
Yes,
and so
100%.
She wants it all. And so Nellie she's looking just like Juliet towards her nurse when she's trying to choose between Paris and Romeo. And she's like, please tell me what to do, because I don't know. And it really talks to the impossible situation that women are in in this society, where they can't say, you know what, I choose neither of you. I'm going to become a Fortune 500 CEO and do my own thing, which I think if Catherine lived now, that's what she would do.
She would, 100%.
Yeah. And then maybe bring, Heathcliff along and Edgar along. Maybe they would be a throuple in today's society. But she lives in a society that is, and remember that Emily is just as constrained and angry by the society that she lives in at this time, the Victorian society. And Nellie tries to, just like the nurse does in Romeo and Juliet, give her some pragmatic advice. She says, perfectly right. If people be right to marry only for the present, and now let us hear what you are unhappy about. Your brother will be pleased, if you marry Edgar. The old lady and gentleman will not object. His parents like you. You will escape from a disorderly, comfortless home. This home, while
you're marrying
you have no name, you're marrying up into a wealthy, respectable one. And you love Edgar, and Edgar loves you. All seems smooth and easy. Where's the obstacle? And remember, she's complaining to Nellie, who's like, bitch, don't complain to me. Do you see what my life is? And then, but Catherine, we can see her as a spoiled brat, but I really identify with Catherine here when she says here and here. she's saying, and it says that she strikes one hand on her forehead and the other on her breast. In whichever place the soul lives, in my soul and in my heart, I'm convinced I'm wrong. And the truth is, it's because she lives in a society where she has to make one decision with her mind, thereby forgoing her heart. Or
vice
one
versa.
decision with her heart, foregoing what she knows to be intelligent. And women do not have the luxury to be
Of
stupid.
both.
To quote another Shakespeare play,
you can't be dumb, because if you're dumb, you're dead on the side of the road.
yeah. And especially as a woman, it's like,
you're scandalized. You can never come back. Her family name is not of ill repute, but it is nothing that you could say, well, they could handle some scandal and revamp. Yeah. No, there is nothing. Your brother is a tyrant. Your parents are dead. And that's it.
And here, to quote Shakespeare with Laertes, when Laertes to Ophelia is kind of like buzzing it up with Hamlet, believe so much in Hamlet that he is young, and with a larger tether may he walk than may be given you. And I think, it's all well and good for Heathcliff to be like, let's run away and be savages. But the world, especially, gives you as a man a greater tether than it does her. And then for her, the world gives her a longer tether if she marries Edgar Linton than can ever be given you as a Black or Indian or person of color man. And I think here we see the paradox of privilege, where like they are both underprivileged in different ways. And they are trying to find, maybe I'm reading too much of a 21st century lens into this, but they're trying to find a way into a world that wants neither of them. The only one the world wants is Edgar Linton. And I think that's why the proximity to power is just too great. She wants,
but also
to be.
He makes the best decision for himself, and he leaves to go find his own path, which he has the ability and entitlement to do. And ending it on this,
and she can't.
He does, and she cannot. But she did in her own way.
And yet he's going to come back and be like, vengeance is mine. And it's like, dude, you already made your money. You did everything. Why? I gave a little spoiler, but read chapters 10 onward and you'll see what we're talking about. In our next episode, we're going to read from chapters 10 to 17. So join us for our discussion on that. And this was fun. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Yes, I loved it. It was so good. We went into some areas that I really hadn't thought about, but I hadn't expressed before. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Make sure you keep your annotations after dark.
Yes. Remember all the best annotations.
See you next time.
After dark. Bye, guys.
Bye.